Hello, everyone. I'm Walker Bragman, and I'm here with Mckayla Wilkes, who is running against House Majority Leader Steny Hoyer. Ms. Wilkes, thank you so much for taking the time and speaking with me. I know that you're a very busy person, especially now since voting is already underway.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So tell me a little bit about why you hopped into this race, and why you've thought that now is the time to take on the arguably the second most powerful person in Congress.
Yeah, so I decided to run for Congress after seeing how broken our system was and in some places fixed, like the criminal justice system, and how our current political system is not centered around regular working class people. Being a survivor, not a victim, but being a survivor of our criminal justice system, being a survivor of our health insurance system because we don't have a healthcare system, and just seeing how we can do so much better and how all of these things that happen to us in our everyday lives that could be fixed, it was seen as normal. And I just kind of had a wake up call. And, it was like, these things shouldn't be normal. It shouldn't be normal for my health insurance, which I pay a premium for every single month, to deny me life-saving medications. And it's not normal for that medication to cost almost $30,000 for a 30-day supply. And I decided, I needed to run for Congress in order to make real transformative change.
I did see that you have sort of a tough background. You grew up while your mom was pregnant, your dad was killed, and then you were sort of raised by your mom and your aunt, who then perished in the terror attacks on the Twin Towers on September 11th. And then, as you mentioned earlier, you came through the criminal justice system when you were very young, and that obviously left its mark. So I would like to talk a little bit about your agenda, because it's a very progressive agenda. It includes things like reparations and ensuring the Green New Deal benefits communities of color, and very sweeping criminal justice reform. So why don't you tell, for people who are not familiar with you, a little bit about how your experience has sort of informed your platform?
Yeah, so my experiences, especially with the criminal justice system, has led me to be a strong advocate for criminal justice reform. I hope I don't sound too radical, but I think that if we could just completely abolish the criminal justice system we have now and start over again, would need to be something that needs to be done. But we can reform it because that's where we are today. But just being incarcerated because, I was impoverished off of traffic debt. Not being able to pay tickets or court fines landed me in jail amongst other women who, every single woman who I was in that unit with when I was incarcerated was there because they could not afford to get out because of the cash bail system. I mean, seeing women, struggle to call family members because you had to pay $20 to use the phone for a couple of minutes, and half of their family members didn't even know that they were incarcerated. And it was just a really sad situation. Even though I was only there for a couple of days, I was taking down the phone numbers of family members for these women and calling them whenever I got released because they couldn't get in touch with them while they were incarcerated. And so that was just a whole bunch of issues that I saw. And at that moment, it was like, these things are systemic, which is why I really want to fight to end the cash bail system, to end the predatory phone rates. And I also want to ensure that we aren't criminalizing people for being impoverished, for having mental health illness, or for suffering from substance abuse addiction. I think that we need to enact a universal healthcare system because, as I said earlier, I was denied healthcare. And everyone thinks that they have good healthcare until you get sick. And then that healthcare is not so good. And it happened to me. I paid a premium every month. and they said they weren't going to pay for the medicine. I had to be hospitalized for 2 weeks while my team of doctors basically argued with my health insurance company, Blue Cross Blue Shield. And they finally decided they were going to pay for the medicine. But just seeing how our current system is just not designed to help regular people. There shouldn't be instances where people die because they can't afford health care. And there shouldn't be instances where people are incarcerated because they can't afford their freedom.
You know, and it's interesting because all of these issues that you mentioned are very connected, and I think the way that they're handled today, in just the mainstream dialogue, they don't make these connections for people. That, you know, it's not just a matter of criminal justice reform. It's not just a matter of empowering, you know, underserved communities. It's also a matter of making sure that those communities have access to basic things like healthcare. It's also, and so. It is very refreshing. I've been doing a series of these interviews with progressive congressional candidates who are challenging incumbents, and it's very refreshing to talk to all of you because those connections are made and your platforms are robust. I'd like to talk a little bit about your opponent. For everybody who is not familiar, Mr. Hoyer is Representative Hoyer. Has been sort of a pain in the neck for progressive causes for quite some time. He's sort of the gatekeeper. The majority leader determines what the floor agenda is and manages the committee chairs. So it's definitely, you got to go through him. Unseating the second most powerful Democrat in the House is a pretty big feat. How do you see that happening, and especially now in the face of the coronavirus, where it's obviously hurt organization efforts or changed them at the very least. So how are you going about that, and why is it so urgent right now?
So our campaign, we are completely in our element. We started out as a completely remote campaign. I was the only one that was in the United States when we first kicked this campaign off. Everyone else was studying abroad. So it's kind of like, as long as we're all in the same time zone, we're good. But we have had the opportunity to start campaigning very early last year. And so we've got to knock on basically our entire universe of knocking on doors. We've made hundreds and thousands of phone calls, as well as text. And so it's kind of, we're just reverting back to how we were in the beginning. But, we got kind of a head start going on. So what we're doing now is reverting back to the things we used to do, like virtual events, virtual town halls. I usually do a town hall at least once a week. Of course, digital ads play a huge part in it. We have a mailer program where we're reaching people. And also, we were able to secure a couple spots on television to run a campaign advertisement throughout the district, which I'll put in a plug. We are fundraising so that we can increase the frequency and how many times our ad plays, and to expand how many channels it plays on. But we're phone banking every single day. Right now, while I'm speaking to you, we have a mega bank going on where we have tons of volunteers calling people throughout the district. We're calling thousands of people a day. And so that's pretty much what we're doing. We have a strong ground game, and it's working out pretty well. I mean, Hoyer, I could imagine what his volunteer base is, if any, because he's so used to, having name recognition. And now,
this is not the first time I've heard this from a congressional candidate that,
yes.
that the incumbent is actually less involved now.
Yes.
But perhaps my question was poorly framed. Not that this has hurt your efforts, but how has this helped you?
Yeah, but that's how it's helped. When we do phone banking, so many people are, and they're like, is this a real person? And I say, well, yeah. And one guy was like, are you sure? And I was like, yeah. He was like, well, you get my vote just for being a real person, because Hoyer had a robo call me yesterday. Like, it's really helping us out. But it's really urgent now more than ever. I've always believed in progressive legislation, but this pandemic, COVID-19, is really highlighting all the disparities we have across the board. And so it's really urgent that we elect progressives into office that is going to handle this pandemic 100 times better than what we're handling it now.
What do you think we need to do?
Well, I think for one, I'm glad to see that in the HEROES Act that they're going to get essential workers hazardous pay, but only under the stipulation, that lobbyists are seen as essential. Did we get that hazard pay for essential employees? But I think that we should be giving everyone a temporary UBI of $2,500 a month, $500 per child. I think that we should be bailing out small businesses instead of bailing out the big businesses. I think that we need to also enact a tracing program, which I don't understand why this was not included in the CARES Act, to be able to trace the virus. I think that we should also include a lot more money for funding so that we can get funding. There is no reason why this shouldn't have happened already. And I think it's because our current political system, the majority of people that are in Congress are corporate backed. And so they're kind of treating this pandemic by treating the economy versus treating people. And so that's something that we should be doing differently. In addition to canceling rent and mortgages, because there is absolutely going to be a wave of evictions once this is over. And canceling rental payments and mortgage payments won't just help residents, but it will also help small business owners as well.
This all seems very basic. It's almost it seems almost negligent that this would not be included in a bill named for America's essential workers. I don't know if you've had the time to look through all 1,815 pages of that legislation. I have admittedly have not, but I did a few keyword searches, and I did find that there is rental assistance, but it's very, very means tested.
Yes.
Like, you have to be within like the lower 80th percentile of your area, which is determined by a bureaucrat. Like, it does seem like the Democratic Party does not have the political will to back big universal programs. And you're somebody who is running on big universal programs. That's so now I do have a question about when you win, assuming you win, who you back for leadership. Because as we know, the progressives in 2018 ran on, well, maybe it's not going to be Pelosi. We're not going to back Pelosi. But then when the time came to put up a speaker candidate, the progressive wing did not put up a speaker candidate and rallied behind Pelosi. And that was just because they didn't have the numbers, I guess. But do you think that Nancy Pelosi should remain speaker if the Democrats hold the House in 2020? And if you were elected, would you vote for her for speaker?
So I think that we could benefit from a more progressive Speaker of the House. And so I would say that I would not vote for Nancy Pelosi for Speaker of the House.
All right. Well, you heard it here. So tell me a little bit about how you got involved in politics. Because you have had this unconventional life story, and I know this is a little disjointed. I should have asked you this question a few minutes ago. But how did you end up getting involved?
Yeah, so after everything just kept happening, and I would say 2014 was the most pivotal year of my life. It's the same year I almost died from a pulmonary embolism and from having blood clots, which was when I needed the life-saving medication. It's the same year that I was incarcerated for driving on a suspended license because I couldn't afford to pay tickets and fines. And it's the same year that I gave birth to my daughter, Madison. And so that year was really pivotal for me in a sense where I began to look more into politics because for me, it was just like, this cannot be normal. Like, why does this keep happening? Why is this okay? And I started to look into my representative. I started to look into legislation. I started to look into campaign finances once I did find out, what Steny was all about that year. Because I wasn't involved in politics before because I didn't trust the political process. Politicians have they have a habit and a pattern of basically selling lip service. They tell you all these wonderful things and they give all these smoke screen words like, we want to provide access to healthcare, and it's like we already have access to it, like we just need the healthcare. And so I started to look into all of that, and it made me say, okay, one day I'm going to run for Congress in 2014. But what really made me dive all the way into politics was watching Bernie Sanders run for president. It was the first time I had ever heard of Bernie Sanders. And so just hearing him speak about issues that were important to our communities, like hearing Bernie Sanders speak was like having a conversation with my friends where we have these what if conversations, like what if this could happen? What if that could happen? And it was like Bernie Sanders was actually, yeah. And he was actually fighting for us. I was like, wow. So, I mean, that really intrigued me and really inspired me to one day run for Congress.
You look like a typical Bernie bro. I mean, I have to say, straight white male all the way, right?
Yeah.
Did you, obviously this was a disappointing year for progressives. 2016 was also disappointing for progressives. You are a woman and a woman of color who's running for office, running for Congress now. And if you win your primary, Joe Biden will, barring something really unforeseen, will be at the top of the ticket. In light of everything that has come out about Joe Biden, the sexual assault allegation, and his latest comments, which sort of just the icing on top of a long, long political career of working with segregationists and whatnot. Do you think, does that make it harder for you to run as a Democrat? Does that affect your commitment to the, not commitment, but does that affect how you feel about the party that this man is will be the party leader, especially if he wins, he will be the party leader? Yeah, I guess that's my question. How does it make you feel that Joe Biden is at the top of the ticket?
Yeah, I would say I wouldn't be disappointed to be a part of the party. I'm proud to be, a Democrat, but I think that a lot of the current elected officials, they don't represent the party values. It's not the other way around. Those are the people who don't represent democratic values because they let the money get in the way, and they've lost sight of actually helping people. I think that we need to bring the Democratic Party back to what it's supposed to be, which is the inclusive party, which is the party that actually helps people. And I think that's what we need to focus on. As far as having to share the ticket with Joe Biden, I wouldn't be happy about it. But I would say for like politicians like Joe Biden, moderates, centrists, the unfortunate fact is that when you are in Congress, you do have to still work with these people. And I think that what we need to do is just use that as an advantage and organize and build coalitions so that we can pass progressive legislation. Because the advantage to having a regular person in Congress that's not a politician, someone who is an organizer, someone who is an activist, is that we can go to Congress and we can organize on the federal level. We can build coalitions on the federal level so that we can actually help people in our communities.
So what would you say to somebody who is not yet out of the tough stuff, is living sort of where you were a few years ago? What would you say to that person now, having come through it and having gotten on the ticket and put up a formidable campaign? What would you say to them?
Yeah, I would tell them to keep fighting. It's hard, because when you're in that situation, you just feel like no one's listening to you. I mean, I'm not in that situation anymore, but I still feel like no one's listening. I mean, I'm running for Congress, so someone's listening, but I mean, my elected official is not listening to me. And I would just encourage them to just keep pushing as hard as you can. Keep pushing your elected officials, write them, call them, fax them, organize against them, activate against them, but let them know that you want to be heard. Because what people don't realize is that everything is political. And for someone who was in my situation who didn't trust in politics, I had no idea that all of my problems were political. And so I would just say, vote, pay attention to who you're voting for, and whoever's in office, hold them accountable. Our minimum wage has been stagnant for 10 years. Hold our elected officials accountable and ask them, why does the cost of living get to go up every year, but my paycheck doesn't? Like, start holding them accountable, organize, and make them hear you. Until then, continue to vote. And that's why we're trying our hardest to get our platform out there. That's why we're trying our hardest to unseat Steny Hoyer so that we can help people in those situations.
It's funny because despite the positions that these individuals represent in Congress, Steny Hoyer is the majority leader, they are just one representative. They're just one election away from defeat. They're one election away from being unseated. And you occasionally, I mean, the left will lose more than they win, but occasionally you do get phenomenal individuals and inspiring individuals like you, Ms. Wilkes. People regular people who stand up and say, I'm gonna make a difference. So I really do commend you for taking that step. It is not easy to run for office.
I would also tell them to run for office. That's what I did. I got tired of it and it was like, fuck it. Oh, I'm sorry.
No.
But I got tired of it and I was just like, forget it. Like, I'm going to run for office because I'm tired. So that would be the biggest thing.
So what were some of the biggest learning curves you had, becoming a congressional candidate?
Oh, definitely not cursing like I just did. No, but seriously, tolerance, because I mean, people will try it online, especially being a Black woman running for office. The racism is it's really crazy. So that's definitely been something that has been a learning curve, being resilient. Also having the time to run for office because it's very time consuming. And especially if you're grassroots, because establishment candidates or corporate politicians, they can just pick up the phone and have a 15-minute conversation and get $20,000. But when you're grassroots, you got to be on the phone like for 6 or 7 hours a day, calling people, asking for $20 and $50 donations. And so I would say those are the biggest learning curves.
Yeah, it is sort of an uneven playing field, but I do think it's worthwhile that candidates who don't take corporate money, go out and they take the time. But this is, I mean, it's sort of, and I imagine that doesn't end when you get into the House, right? Like there was that memo that was released a few years ago. It was like 8 hours a day fundraising or some crazy number like that. It's like you should spend at least 40% of your time on the phone to donors. So when you get in, what are your immediate priorities? Because there'll be a freshman congresswoman and not a lot of power, but what are some of the first things you do when you get in?
One of the first things that I want to do is focus on campaign finance reform, because we can talk about passing progressive legislation, but it just makes it that much harder if corporations are allowed to still dump massive amounts of money into our politics. The other thing that I want to do, which I know I can get done, very quickly, is to fully fund the Section 8 program, which would only cost $40 billion, which is not a lot in federal funds, but it would essentially end homelessness. And then I want to focus on universal health care once we get that corporate money out of politics. I want to pass a Green New Deal, and I want to enact truly transformative criminal justice reform.
I'm glad that you mentioned housing, because some of the work that I've done has been on homelessness. And one of the big causes of homelessness is obviously lack of supply for housing. Interestingly, though, that doesn't necessarily mean that there aren't the units available. It just means that people can't afford those units. I'm here in Brooklyn, and in New York City, around me, there's something like 87,000 empty apartment housing units they're privately owned. They're and they're just not on the market. So it is good to have the idea of building more affordable housing. But I wanted to ask you, what do you do about the inequality that is sort of behind a lot of the housing crisis, not just in New York, but in San Francisco and across the country in metropolitan areas?
Yeah, so we definitely want to enact legislation to stop the predatory practices that are happening as it pertains to the inequality in the housing market, like protecting LGBTQ, IA plus communities from being discriminated against from housing, stopping, putting an end to policies or things such as like redlining, and just ensuring that folks are able to get the housing that they actually need, regardless of race, identity, or any other factors that may play into it.
Would you support a vacancy tax?
Yes, I would. I absolutely would, because it's just amazing how like you said, there are all these empty units. And that's why, especially when we talk about the pandemic now, there are so many apartment complexes that are evicting tenants. And it's like, you're not going to go bankrupt if 20 people out of your building can't pay their rent when you have a majority of empty apartments. It's just crazy.
Right. Well, Ms. Wilkes, thank you so much for taking the time and speaking with me. It's been a real privilege for me, and tell everybody where they can find more out about you, and where they can donate, and then also voting. The deadline for voting is June 2nd.
Yes. If anyone would like to contribute, our race is a race of people versus money. We're grassroots, but we still need money. We are still fundraising down to the last minute because every single dollar counts. So I would definitely encourage everyone to send a donation. Our average contribution is about $20 a person. So definitely contribute whatever you can. The big thing that would really help us out right now is phone bankers. We need help phone banking. We phone bank every single day. This is how we reach people in the district. And phone banking is so important that I have had people vote for us just based off conversations. To just stress how important phone banking is. We called a voter one day and they had already marked their ballot for Steny. But after they had a conversation with one of our phone bankers, they asked how could they get another ballot and vote for us. That's how important these conversations are. And so I would encourage anyone to go to our website, Mckayla2020.com. You can hit the donate tab if you want to contribute. If you want to join us in our phone banking parties, definitely sign up for a shift under the volunteer tab.
All right. Well, thank you very much. I hope that, best of luck to you. And if all goes well, hopefully we'll have more of these conversations in the future.
Yes. Thanks for having me.